58 doesn't come with balloons, or milestones, or anything really, other than another quiet morning. I sat on the porch like I always do, crossword puzzle half solved, coffee lukewarm, and the wind blowing just enough to remind me how still the rest of my life has become. Since Caleb stopped calling, I filled the silence with habits. Water the garden, dust the shelves, pretend the phone might still ring. He hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. Not since the argument, sharp, cruel, and final, that split the last pieces of us. I've replayed it in my mind so many times, the words don't even sting anymore. They just echo. That morning felt no different. Gray sky, cold toast, a voicemail from the pharmacy. I was carrying a basket of laundry when I heard the knock. Just one. Then silence. Not the neighbor kid, not the mailman. It was too careful, too intentional. I opened the door, and there it was. A box wrapped in plain brown paper, a single silver ribbon tied neatly around the middle. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was unmistakably Caleb's. Even blue-inked letters shaped like architecture. Precise, emotionless. I didn't touch it at first, just stared. I whispered my own name under my breath like it might answer something. Inside, under the paper, was a white bakery box. Tucked inside tissue were cookies, dozens of them, each one different, intricate, sugar-dusted stars, flowers and blue icing, tiny leaf patterns. They looked delicate enough to shatter if I breathed too hard. There was no note except a small card taped to the lid. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." I held the card in both hands. I don't know how long I stood there. It had been 2 years. No apology, no explanation. Now this. I didn't eat them. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something inside me flinched. Call it pride or fear. Or that motherly instinct that never really shuts off. I sealed one cookie in a Tupperware and placed it in the fridge. Maybe for later. Maybe just to keep a piece of the gesture. The rest, I rewrapped gently. My hands shook only once. I drove them over to Eloise, Caleb's ex-mother-in-law. She lived just 10 minutes away, alone since her daughter moved across the country. She and I had kept in touch quietly, even after the divorce. A rare kind of grace. She opened the door in her usual robe, wind chimes dancing behind her. I handed her the box before she could protest. Told her, simply, "You've always had a sweet tooth." She smiled, eyes kind, unaware. I didn't tell her the cookies were from Caleb. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want to say his name out loud. That night, I couldn't stop looking at the fridge, at that one untouched cookie, waiting, at the chair Caleb used to sit in, at the kitchen clock that hadn't ticked since last winter. The phone rang the next morning just as I was pouring my coffee. I jumped. It was Caleb, his name on the screen, his voice when I picked up smooth and familiar, and when he asked, "How were they?" His tone too casual, too rehearsed. I told him I gave them away. His silence said everything. That was the moment I realized. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The day after the call, I kept waiting for another one, but the phone stayed quiet. Caleb hadn't called back, and I hadn't stopped thinking about how sharp his voice had gone, how fast it shifted when I told him I didn't eat the cookies. That reaction wasn't disappointment. It wasn't even hurt. It was panic. Eloise called around noon sounding cheerful. She thanked me for the cookies, said they were too beautiful to eat, but of course, she'd eaten two. "The blue flower one and one with gold leaves," she said with a giggle. "Delicate, just lovely." I forced a smile even though she couldn't see it. My throat felt tight. "Glad you liked them," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. By that evening, I'd forgotten how to sit still. I wiped already clean counters, rearranged picture frames, folded towels twice. When I opened the trash to take something out, I saw it. A small, clear plastic bottle wedged deep near the bottom of the bag, hidden beneath dryer lint and crumpled receipts. It wasn't mine. I didn't remember buying it. No label, no markings. Just a faint ring of white dust clinging to the inside like ash. My heart started pounding. Not hard, not fast, just deep, like my body knew something before my brain did. I retrieved the cookie from the fridge and placed it next to the bottle on the kitchen table. For a long time, I just stared. Something about it felt wrong. Not just the bottle, not just Caleb's voice, but all of it. The sudden gift, the silence broken without explanation, the urgency in his tone. It felt like a test or a trap. I didn't sleep that night. Every time the fridge clicked on, I sat up. I started Googling ingredients, baking blogs, forensic cases. And in a folder in my filing cabinet, I found the business card of Janelle Maroro, a former student of mine who now worked at a private biochemistry lab across town. I'd written her a recommendation letter 5 years ago. She'd said she owed me. I wondered if the favor still stood. I texted her, "Janelle, I need something tested. Quietly. Can I come by tomorrow morning?" She responded within minutes. "Of course. Bring it early." That night, I placed the cookie and the bottle in a lunchbox, wrapped in napkins like they were leftovers. I locked the front door twice, drew every curtain, sat with a cup of tea I didn't drink. I kept thinking about Caleb at age 7, meticulous, exacting, the way he'd line up crayons by hue, the tantrum he threw when I once folded his shirts out of sequence. The journals he kept even as a teenager, filled with tracking sheets, food logs, mood diaries, weather charts. I used to call it brilliance. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I drove out before sunrise. The air was heavy with mist and everything felt too quiet. Janelle met me in the parking lot, her lab coat sharp against the dull morning light. She didn't ask questions, just lifted the lid of the lunchbox and raised her eyebrows slightly. "This the kind of favor I'll regret?" she asked gently. I tried to smile. It didn't quite land. "Just tell me what's in it." She nodded and disappeared into the side entrance of the lab. I sat in the car with the engine idling, watching the fog creep over the windshield. Something in my chest tightened. If I was wrong, I'd overreacted. If I was right... I didn't finish that thought. When my phone rang 2 hours later, I jumped hard enough to spill my coffee. "Claire?" Janelle's voice was low, steady. "There's something in the cookie. Traces of a compound chemically related to aconitine, monkshood." She paused. "It's not something that ends up in food by accident." I didn't ask Janelle to explain. I knew what monkshood was. Back when I used to assign Hamlet to 8th graders, I'd talk about poisons in literature, how they often came from nature, how they carried symbolism. Monkshood, aconitum, was beautiful and deadly, just like the cookies. I drove home with the windows up and the radio off. I didn't want music. I wanted silence, something to fill with thoughts I didn't want to say out loud yet. Back at the house, I went to the bookshelf, not to hide, just to ground myself. Caleb's high school yearbook sat tucked between gardening guides and a Hemingway collection. I hadn't opened them in years. Inside one, folded carefully, was an old list he'd written in pencil. A to-do list from when he was 12. 1. Water basil. 2. Refill ant traps. 3. Make diagram for plant toxins. 4. Reorganize spice rack. 5. Tell mom not to buy sweet onions again. I stared at the third item. Make diagram for plant toxins. He was 12. At the time, I'd laughed, thought it was part of his gifted and quirky phase. He'd always been fascinated by precision, by control. When he got older, he once spent an entire summer cross-referencing herbal text and sketching out how roots affected digestion. I called it brilliant. Now, I wasn't sure what I had called brilliant was actually foreshadowing. I pulled out my laptop and searched for his old screen name, the one he used when he moderated a gardening forum during college. The site was still live, dull gray interface, barely active. But one thread stood out. Username, Symmetry88. Topic, controlled dosing in natural extractions. The language was clinical, emotionless, almost academic. But I recognized Caleb's phrasing. One post read, "If the goal is not death, but impairment, short-term neurological disarray, aconitine is ideal in micrograms. Timing onset is crucial. Visual appeal helps mask intent." I stared at the screen, my throat dry. This wasn't just about toxicity. This was intentional. This was someone thinking about how to use harm artistically. I didn't call Eloise. I couldn't. The hospital had called earlier that morning, routine update. Her condition was stable but confusing. Nausea, weakness, trouble concentrating, no clear diagnosis yet. They were running deeper panels. I told them nothing, not yet. Instead, I called Caleb. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey," he said, casual, smooth, like we were starting over, like he hadn't sent me poison. "I've been thinking about the cookies," I said. A pause. "Oh?" "They were beautiful," I said quietly. "Too beautiful, really. I wanted them to be special." "Do you remember Eloise likes blue?" Another pause. "She always liked florals," he said. I didn't say she ate a floral one. Silence. I also didn't mention which shape she liked. His voice changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "You're fishing, Mom." "No," I said. "I'm remembering." I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then, "Do you remember the time you spit out a walnut cookie and scrubbed your mouth until it bled?" That was a reaction. It was disgust. He didn't respond. "Do you remember what you told me afterward?" I asked. No answer. "You said you should have known better." I could hear his breathing. Sharp. Measured. I softened my tone. "Why now, Caleb? Why reach out now?" Another long silence. "Because you kept moving on." My stomach turned. "Excuse me?" "You mourned Dad and then you kept going. Teaching. Gardening. Laughing with Eloise like nothing broke. You never sat in it. You never paused." My voice cracked. "I did. Every night. I just didn't ask the world to watch. I thought, if you felt helpless, maybe you'd understand." My knees buckled. I sat on the kitchen stool. The line stayed open, his breathing steady like he wasn't ashamed, just resolved. "That's what this was?" I whispered. "Revenge?" "Clarity," he said. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream either. I just sat at the kitchen table, still holding the phone, the screen now dark, my reflection faint in the glass. The words, "if you felt helpless, maybe you'd understand," circled like vultures. There was no apology in them, no hesitation. There was intent. I stood up slowly, poured the cold tea down the sink, and rinsed the cup twice. My hands moved on their own, mechanical. I had been trained by years of motherhood to keep moving, even through the worst storms, but nothing had prepared me for this. The realization that my son, the boy I had raised, read to, bathed, fed, fought for, was capable of this cold precision. I needed to do something, anything, but not panic. Not yet. I went into the guest room, what used to be Caleb's bedroom before college, and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were journals, stacks of them, some his, some mine. I flipped through his high school biology notebook, page after page of diagrams, human systems, dosage charts, interactions between compounds. One entry was labeled "Variables in Observed Neurotoxicity," and under it, in his careful handwriting, "Taste must override suspicion. Sweetness hides sin." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet. I left the hallway light on, something I hadn't done since my husband passed away. At 2:13 a.m., my landline rang. It hadn't rung in weeks. I answered without thinking. "Hello? Claire?" It was Laya, Caleb's ex-wife. Her voice was raw, tight. I didn't know who else to call. I stood up straight. "What's wrong?" "It's my mom. She's worse. Disoriented, slurring. They had to move her to ICU. The doctors, they're saying it might be neurological." I felt the room tilt slightly. Did she say anything? About what she ate? About the cookies? Leia hesitated. She said, "You brought them, from Caleb." I closed my eyes. "Yes, I did." "Claire," her voice broke. "Is there something I should know?" I paused, then made a decision. "Yes," I said. "And I'll tell you everything. But not over the phone. And the next morning, I printed out every forum post I'd found, every digital footprint Caleb had left online under his aliases. I labeled the cookie bag, the pill bottle, the audio transcript from our call. Then I called Detective Fallon Reyes, the local investigator who'd helped Eloise file a missing items report last year. He'd once been a student at the school where I taught. I told him I needed to talk, in person. He met me in his office at 10:30 a.m., small, no-nonsense, walls covered in dry erase markers and notes. "I need you to hear something," I said, handing over the recording. He listened. His eyes didn't blink much, but I saw the change. The tension in his jaw, the line between his brows tightening. "This is your son?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes." "And you believe he meant for you to eat the cookie?" I shook my head. "No, that's the twist." He leaned forward. "Then who?" I met his gaze. "Eloise." He didn't speak for a full minute. I filled the space. He's never forgiven me for surviving after his father died. He thought I moved on too quickly, that I emotionally abandoned him. But I didn't. I just coped differently. Eloise was the one who supported me, who called, who reminded me to keep living. I swallowed hard, and I think he hated that. He hated how she became a source of comfort I couldn't be. Reyes nodded slowly. "I'll need to file this, formally. If there's even a chance she was the intended target, she was. And you're willing to testify? Submit all of this as evidence?" I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling, not anymore. "Yes." Because I'd rather betray my son in court than bury another woman who didn't deserve to die. Detective Reyes kept everything. The cookie, the bottle, the printouts. He promised to open a formal investigation and handle things delicately. But I could tell what he wasn't saying. There might not be enough. The audio hinted, the bottle implied, the cookie proved presence, not purpose. But what it didn't prove, yet, was intent. And that's what I needed, something undeniable. Something that couldn't be explained away as accident, misunderstanding, or bitterness between mother and son. So I made a choice. I would face him, not as his mother, but as the woman he underestimated. That night, I packed a small voice recorder in my coat pocket, fully charged, fresh batteries. I reviewed the instructions 3 times. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, what questions might make him slip. I baked a fresh loaf of banana bread, not because he liked it, he didn't, but because I needed a reason to knock on his door without raising suspicion. Then I wrote a note. "For Caleb, from Mom, let's talk." It was a mirror of his card to me, a quiet reminder, you started this. When I arrived, he answered the door in a soft pullover and bare feet, like nothing had happened, like we were 2 adults repairing an old wound. "Mom," he said, neutral but cautious. "This is a surprise." "I thought we could talk," I said, holding up the bread. "You sent cookies. I bring carbs. Fair trade." He smiled, just barely. "Come in." His apartment was as meticulous as I remembered. Everything labeled, aligned. His mugs faced the same direction in the cabinet. The living room had one chair angled precisely at the corner of the rug. He'd always hated when I moved things without asking. "Coffee?" he offered. "No, thank you." I sat down on the sofa, tucking the recorder deeper into my coat pocket. He brought out 2 plates anyway, cut a slice of bread with surgical care. "I wanted to say thank you," I began. "For the birthday gesture, it meant something." He tilted his head. "You're welcome." "I never asked. What made you decide to bake?" He smiled faintly. "A new hobby focuses the mind." Even the frosting, those star cookies were beautiful. His hand paused on the bread knife, just for a second, then the slip. Ruth always liked stars. I hadn't said which shape Eloise had eaten. I sat back. "Did she?" He nodded. "She used to put them on everything, even her Christmas cards, you remember." I didn't respond, just watched him, carefully, quietly. "You know," I said, "it's strange. I never knew you were interested in flowers. Monkshood, for example." That did it. His fingers tightened on the knife. ever so slightly. "I'm not," he said too quickly. "Janelle said it was a rare choice for baking." He turned toward the sink, rinsing the clean blade. A practiced move, calm, controlled. "You went to Janelle." "She found something, enough to make the hospital run a full toxicology panel." A long pause. "I'm not sure what you're trying to imply, Mom." "I'm not implying," I said softly. "I'm confirming." He turned back to me, no longer smiling. "You've always misunderstood me," he said. I stood up, heart hammering. "No, I think I finally understand you completely." I let that hang in the air, let him see the steadiness in my stance, let him wonder what I'd recorded, what I hadn't. When I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something tucked behind the spice rack on the counter, a small bottle, identical in shape to the one I'd found in my trash. He moved subtly, positioning himself between me and the object. I didn't push, not yet. I smiled thinly. "Tell Laya I send my best, and Eloise too." "Of course," he said. As I stepped into the cold air outside, I pressed stop on the recorder. I didn't exhale until I was locked inside my car, and then I hit send, forwarding the audio straight to Detective Reyes. Detective Reyes called just before noon the next day. His tone was clipped but steady. The audio helped. Combined with the toxicology report from St. Luke's and what the hospital found in Eloise's blood work, it's enough for a warrant. I didn't ask what kind. I already knew. "Will you arrest him?" I asked, voice low. "We'll take him in for questioning first, quietly. No cuffs unless he resists. You won't need to be there." I wasn't planning on it, but I stayed by the window anyway. I watched the light shift across the street. The shadows stretched long across my porch. My tea went cold. My back ached. I didn't move. At 3:17 p.m., a dark sedan pulled up outside Caleb's building. 2 officers stepped out, one in plain clothes, calm, unhurried. One of them rang the buzzer, a pause. Then the door opened. Caleb stepped outside in his usual gray sweater, composed, controlled. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just blinked in the sunlight like it bothered him, like the real world had finally caught up. I didn't go to the station. There was nothing left for me to say. Instead, I went to St. Luke's. Eloise was awake, her skin still pale, her smile tentative. Leia sat beside her, eyes red-rimmed. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. She didn't ask about the investigation. She didn't ask why. She just reached for my hand. And for the first time in days, I let myself cry. Not because of what happened, but because what almost happened didn't. That evening, I stood in my kitchen under the yellow glow of the pendant light. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt still. I opened the fireproof lockbox from the hallway closet. Inside was the final piece of it all, one star-shaped cookie, still frosted, still untouched, still deadly. Beside it, the card Caleb had sent. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." I sealed them in an evidence bag Detective Reyes had given me, just in case. Not for revenge, for memory. The formal charges came 3 days later: attempted poisoning, possession of a controlled toxin, intent to harm. They didn't charge him with attempted murder. There wasn't enough for that, but it was enough to hold him, to keep him from walking free with a smile and clean hands. Reyes called to let me know the court date. "It's a process," he said gently. "Not quick, not easy, but it's in motion." I thanked him. I didn't know what else to say. Eloise was discharged 2 days after that, weak but stable. Her speech slurred only slightly, and her memory flickered like an old film reel. But she remembered Mimi. "You saved me," she said one morning, eyes brimming. I squeezed her hand. "No, you just ate faster than I did." She chuckled, then winced. The laugh still hurt. Leia visited one night, standing on my porch with 2 steaming cups of cocoa. Her hands shook as she handed one to me. She hadn't spoken to Caleb since his arrest. She said she didn't plan to. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. He'd changed, got secretive, angry in this quiet way. She paused. I should have said something sooner. You couldn't have known, I told her. But inside, I wasn't sure if I even believed myself, because I should have known, should have seen it in the way he watched, measured, remembered, the way he stored every wound like a ledger he planned to balance. He was my son, and I had missed it. That night, I stood at the window and watched the moonrise. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that crushed. It was the kind that mourned, the kind that held space, for grief, for guilt, for whatever came next. And as I turned off the lights and walked down the hall toward the old guest room, I told myself the same thing I used to whisper to Caleb when he was small, curled up in the dark after a bad dream. You're safe now. You're safe. A week later, I opened the fridge and saw the empty space where the cookie had once been. Not because I ate it, not because I forgot, but because I had chosen to let it go. I'd packed it, carefully, coldly, into the sealed evidence bag Detective Reyes left with me and tucked it into the fireproof box in my closet. Not to preserve the proof, but to remember how close I came to mistaking danger for reconciliation. That box now holds 2 things, the cookie and the card. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. I look at those words differently now. Before, I read them as a wish, a longing. Now I see them as a warning. Because sometimes when someone says, let's start over, what they really mean is, let me rewrite the story my way. I've started teaching again, just part-time. Creative writing, middle school kids, they ask big questions, the kind adults are too afraid to say out loud. One girl asked me last Thursday, can you love someone and still not trust them? And I said, without flinching, yes, you can. Because I do. I love the boy Caleb used to be, the one who color-coded his cereal boxes and hugged me without asking why. But I don't trust the man he became, and I no longer pretend they're the same person. People always say motherhood is eternal, that it's instinct, unconditional. Maybe they're right. But here's what I know now. Being a mother doesn't mean letting yourself be destroyed by the very person you created. Sometimes love means protecting them. Sometimes love means stepping back. And sometimes, like now, love means locking the door and keeping the key.